Welcome to The Democratic Voice, your community action program dedicated to bringing you the issues that impact America and concern Colorado. Brought to you every week at this time by the El Paso County Democratic Party, your voice in the future of Colorado Springs.
Good evening and welcome to The Democratic Voice. I'm Les Thompson, sitting in for Fred Hardy, who's out of town this week. We're quickly closing in on this election cycle. November's fast approaching. There's still lots of work to be done to get a different voice for the working men and women, for the people of Colorado up into the state legislature. It's also very important that we send some representatives to the House, to Congress in Washington, D.C. Somebody that'll go up there and make a voice for the rest of Colorado instead of the same old voice that we've always had. Tonight we have with us Curtis Imrie. He's running for Congressional District number 5. Curtis, good evening and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Les. Proud to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Curtis?
Well, I was born on the Potomac back in Washington, D.C., but I had this, my family had the sense to leave back in the 50s, and I haven't been back since. I grew up in the Deep South until I was 18. I went to Northwestern University and wrestled there in the Big Ten for 4 years. Settled in Colorado back in the 60s. Have had a little place at the base of Mount Columbia up in the Arkansas Valley watershed for the past 35 years, where I've been a small rancher. I've also worked as an independent filmmaker and have raised donkeys, good Democrats. And for close to 30 years, I've been doing the Packboro races up there in Fairplay, Leadville, Cripple Creek, and in Buena Vista, nonstop. I've never missed a race. Won the world championship 3 times, whatever that's worth. And, inadvertently started breeding donkeys that placed as the grand champion up at the National Western Stock Show, and have had a lot of fun raising these animals on the side until this recent drought where the hay situation where it's quintupled has darn near put me out of business. So,
yeah. Well, something you mentioned there, you say you've worked as an independent filmmaker, and I know we have with us one of your videos, correct?
Right.
And you have 2 out?
I do.
If somebody wanted a copy of this, how could they get hold of you to get a copy?
Well, I'm in the phone book in Buena Vista. Imrie, I-M-R-I-E. I'd be happy to send one out.
Okay, and you also have a website?
I have a website. It's curtisimrie.com. The spelling is kind of tricky, but it's curtisimrie.com.
Okay.
And there's everything and more than you'd probably want to know about yours truly.
Well, and you've got all your good Democrats on there too, correct?
I do, every one, and people might think they're pets, but it's still livestock, and the donkey, as misunderstood as a Democrat is a pretty special animal with its patience and its long suffering, and is the first large quadruped to be domesticated by man, and has been helping out man, and particularly third world countries for centuries now. Well, maybe 2,000, 3,000 years.
Well, good. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about why do you want to run?
Boy. Well, I love my country. I love the land and the place of central Colorado and Colorado Springs. I think the so-called People's House, Congress back in Washington, D.C. has been so corrupted by big money that it's no longer the People's House. It's a bawdy house that's been basically bought and sold by the big money donors who pretty much dictate what goes in Congress, and consequently there's this disconnect, a major disconnect between the kindness and the decency of the American people and our foreign policy and our domestic policy. And there's a point, at least in my family, where our code is that you pitch in when the powerless need some help, and I have the training and the background and the success I think to be able to implement an uphill battle against a well-entrenched incumbent and give the so-called people's house back to the people instead of the organized corporate money interests, which have totally corrupted the whole situation.
Right. Pretty much bought and paid for politicians.
Yes, I would say that. Even you know, and we're not immune as Democrats.
Right.
And I'm what they might call an insurgent Democrat, an old-style FDR Democrat. And frankly, if you look at 1932 and 2002, there aren't a whole lot of differences.
Right. Well, what are some of the issues that you'll be running on, Curtis?
Well, first and foremost, and one of the things that got me into this was the elephant in the living room of American politics that nobody seems to want to talk about. And that's, it's not 9/11. It's not going into Iraq. It's not Enron, WorldCom, MCI. It's the division of the nation into two separate countries. The division of the Congressional District, which is 6 counties, Teller, Chaffee, Lake, Park, Fremont, and El Paso. The division of our Congressional District into 2 different districts. And that is 2/5 of us are doing as well or better than we've ever done before. And 3/5 of us are standing still or falling further behind. And that's been going on for a long, long time. And everything coming out of Washington, all the policy coming out of Washington, all it does is exacerbate this, make the situation worse. And my politics are pretty simple. I live in Pinturbia, as it's called now, because it's becoming part of Colorado Springs, but it used to be a rural area. And up there, and where I come from, politics is basically about 2 things. It's who's getting screwed and who's doing the screwing. And I think those 3/5, the majority of us, are taking it in the shorts with policy coming out of Washington, D.C. And I'd like to address the fact that the results of this gap are going to be disastrous and incalculable if we don't start doing something about it and directing some of the creativity and the resources of this country towards our social and economic challenges. And the way to address it, the way to get started, is first off to do something about the way campaigns are funded and where the money comes from that sends these ladies and gentlemen to Washington. And that's my big soapbox issue, and it has been for nearly a decade now, and one I can preach about for a long time. And campaign finance reform, that's when everybody's eyes glaze over. But if you ask them, is there too much money, big money in politics, they understand that. And 99.2% of the $3 billion raised in political campaigns comes from big money. Only 0.8% of the American population gives more than $200 to political campaigns. The rest of that money, 99.8, comes from big money, and more than 2/3 of that comes from organized corporate special interest money. So who do you think gets their phone calls returned? Who do you think blocks the improvements to our environment, the improvements for labor situations, the improvements with these pharmaceutical costs? It's the people versus the powerful, and that's what keeps me in it. And who'd have thunk that a decade ago, when the poobahs and the pundits and all the wise people in Washington were saying big money out of politics doesn't have a chance, that campaign finance reform doesn't have a chance. And John McCain, a Republican, almost took it to the White House when he made that his issue. And I don't care who makes it their issue, just as long as we give this government back to the people, because as it is now, we have generally conceded our power to corporations, and they're showing us pretty well, particularly with these scandals, that their bottom line is what dictates most of it, and the people who are getting hurt are the middle and the bottom. And once again, that gap, that monstrous gap, is exacerbated by that situation. So I'm running on big money out of politics, and it's kind of good for a guy coming out of nowhere, going against a well-entrenched incumbent, to run basically on a shoestring and a gas card and a phone card and the goodwill of the people. And the trick now is to find some name recognition.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned was about the wealth and the social and economic justice. We know that the top 10% of the population owns 70% of the wealth in the country, you know, and those are the
Could
people
be more than that.
Well, yeah, and those are the people that are giving that big money into politics and basically controlling politicians. And so what you're looking at with fair campaign is distribute the money evenly, let the guy put out there who he is, what he stands for, and run on who he is and not who has the most money.
Heaven forbid that somebody runs on character, track record, and brightness and so forth. And dare I speak the word public funding. If you want a public result, we need public funding. As it is now, we have an elite result. We are making the world safe for multinationals, big oil, big tobacco, big pharmaceuticals, and so forth. But with public funding, remember we used to have that check off on your
On
tax
return?
income tax.
Yeah.
Well, if for $2.50, I think we could get our democracy back, and we could have clean elections. Lord knows, little has been done to make real steps towards clean elections, even after Florida.
Yeah. As one of your other issues that's listed here is conserve, protect, and restore. Do you want to talk about that? CPR?
Sure. CPR is another one of my soapbox issues. We all know what it stands for in an emergency, and frankly, I think this democracy and our environment isn't an emergency. I think we're trashing the planet. I don't know anybody who doesn't know that. And CPR is, for me, it's an old David Brower term. It's conservation, preservation, and restoration. And for me, the word the environment is a little overused, and it polarizes people to a great degree, and those bunny huggers and tree huggers and so forth are pitted against wages and jobs. And you hate to see the economy pitted against the environment, when in fact the environment is our economy. It's the golden goose that's been laying this wonderful golden egg for us and the planet for ages. And at this point, if you accept the fact that global warming is pretty serious and these radical changes in the weather aren't just normal cycles, maybe Mother Nature is telling us something. Maybe Mother Nature, in fact, bats last. And she's going to keep beating us over the head until we get it, that maybe we have to practice a little restraint. Maybe we have to control the institutionalized, unbridled greed that's tearing up the planet and also tearing it up for working folks.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you're on the back here of this Colorado Central magazine. Got your website, www.curtisimrie, CurtisImrie.com. And also this is a phone number where folks can get hold of you?
Anytime. I pick up my own phone.
Okay, 719-395-8065. And just tells a little bit about what you're standing for, the social and economic justice, the conserve, protect, restore, and the big money out of politics. Those are your three main platform items?
They are, and social and economic justice, that covers dozens of things.
Right.
just briefly, the fact that we want a world-class education for all of our kids, we're not getting it.
Right.
Because of the big money influences in our government that want to channel the money elsewhere, particularly in this time of crisis. The tax situation is pretty unfair. They just had a $1.3 trillion tax break for the elite, and 1% of the top income in the country gets 72% of the break. And I think that's a joke, where the working guy and the middle class could use a more graduated tax, and the people that are making practically nothing don't pay a tax. And anybody making more than $10 million ought to just pay a flat 14.3% tax rate. If they want a flat tax, that would work for them. But our taxation is grossly unfair, particularly when you see who's sitting in Congress. We got 100 millionaires back there. So they've made it their mission, even when the country's infrastructure badly needs funding, to give themselves this enormous tax break and claim it stimulates the economy. I'd kind of like to see FICA start after you make $36,000 until up rather than up until you make $36,000.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the social and economic justice. You know, another thing that plays in there is the health care. I mean, more and more Americans are losing their health care because the costs are skyrocketing. It's out of control. What do you see or how do you feel that Congress ought to address that?
I think we ought to hold our feet so close to the fire that it singes the toenails off them, that we ought to clean house and get a people's Congress again. And believe you me, with the billing fraud, the big-time insurance companies gouging people, we're the only industrialized nation on the planet that doesn't have a decent health care for its citizens. I get indignant about it because I'm getting a little long in the tooth myself, and I've been paying just ridiculous bills for my pharmaceutical drugs and my health care. And there's 44 million people out there who are either uninsured or have no insurance. And the idea of calling those folks deadbeats makes me come out of my chair.
Right.
And we can do it. The people want it. But once again, it's that key issue for me of big money out of politics. The big pharmaceutical companies, the big insurance companies, they don't want to see that. And they're bought and paid for congressmen. They're bought and paid for administration. Their corporate Congress, their corporate Senate, they're blocking that. And to me, it's unexcusable, and it's almost worth running for Congress.
Yeah. Well, like you said, there's a high number of Americans that are underinsured or don't have any insurance, and that number rises every day because of, as people lose their jobs, they can't afford to make those COBRA payments to maintain their insurance, and it's sad that America, the top industrial nation, and yet we rank so far down on our health care. We pay the highest cost, but I think we rank 36 in the world in the service we provide in that health care, and it's just not right.
Well put. And you are not a communist or a socialist because you think that perhaps the government could be more representative of the will of the people and expedite a plan where our seniors are properly taken care of, where the uninsured and the poorly insured are probably taken care of. To say nothing of dental. Mm-hmm. There's 100 million people with no dental plan. It seems, I'm at that age where every other month it seems like a tooth is coming out.
Yeah.
But once again, it's back to my major issue of big money out of politics, because we can't make any of these changes as long as the organized corporate special interest boys are funding our candidates. We need public funding, we need a public result, and we need representatives who are back there for the common good, not the special interest good.
Yeah. Something you said there, is taking care of our seniors. I mean, and that's something, especially with the health care. You know, Social Security is a minimum. It's not something that it's a subsidy for retirement. It's not something that can really carry somebody through retirement. But medically, taking care of our seniors, because I look at, you know, these are people that have built our country. They've served in the military. You know, they've protected our country, and that's something that, as a United States, that we ought to provide for our seniors is adequate health care. Prescriptions, because I know a lot of seniors, their Social Security is eaten up in buying those prescriptions, or they don't buy them because they can't afford them, and that's not right if they need that.
Les, I've seen seniors in the supermarket kind of sheepishly shopping in the pet food section for meat. It's often a question for them between whether they afford their medications or eat. If they want gifts for their kids, or whether they get their medications or their dental work. A great and dear friend of mine, she'd blanch at being called a senior, but I think in your 70s you have the right to be called a senior, but she has to go to Mexico to get her decent dental rates, to get her medical prescriptions, and it's just not right that we can't afford them the dignity and the respect that they've earned for building this country. And frankly, we're getting there ourselves. There's, as the baby boom bulge comes down the python, I think that apart from stopping a war, bringing in women's rights and civil rights and so forth, that there's a whole generation out there, as much maligned as it may have been, we're going to do something about health care and do right by Social Security, and we can do better than giving it to the gamblers and the speculators on Wall Street. They've shown what they can do with the economy.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, there is. I'm terribly depressed about the turnout for the primaries, and it bodes badly for the general election. Across the country, it was 12 to 16% turning out for the primaries, and I understand why democracy's taken it in the shorts right now, and that's part of the reason I'm running, is that it is in crisis. It's when you have that few people turning out to vote in a primary, it indicates that perhaps the real majority in the fall election will be 61% of the folks who are going to stay home and say a pox on both parties. And I think it's up to us to think about being candidates. Part of the reason the primaries were so low is because there were so few contested offices. And that's not right, and nobody's doing that perfect a job, that we can't have a dialogue. And I love my sports, I love pack burro racing, and where you get the good coaching and you get the courageous athletes, and in our military where we have courage on the hoof. Why can't we infuse that in our citizenship and our communities, and make politics a blood sport, a great indoor sport where candidates come out and debate these issues? And I would love, by the way, to debate the incumbent and flush him out and have a debate every week for the next 10 weeks coming up to the election. And make that an indoor sport, and really see people come off the mat and see the interplay and the civilized mano a mano as we get these issues on the table. Because otherwise, we have people watching their television, and granted, it's still one of the greatest communication tools we've got, but unfortunately, it's become basically an advertising medium. And you know, we own these public airwaves, and you'd think the major networks and the local stations would make it their civic duty to sponsor debates and get these issues into people's homes. So I see democracy suffering, and I see it. Does this country, does this district want a democracy, or do we want a monarchy? Do we want by the people, or for the people and of the people, or do we want by big money, for big money, and of big money? So as Jim Hightower says, he says that if the gods had meant us to vote, he'd give us candidates. And I took that to heart. And despite overwhelming registration, the opposing party, I think it's very important to make the incumbent accountable, to encourage debate, and encourage some high school kid or some college kid that this is not heart surgery, to have some convictions and some issues that you care about, to have a union man, to have a housewife. Hell, any woman who has successfully raised one or more kids, to me, is a prime candidate for running for any public office and representing her community. And we need candidates, people who care, who just aren't so concerned with power and winning, but do love their land and their place and are willing to speak up for it. So I guess if I have any big issue, I want to see a 98% turnout. I want to see neighbor meeting neighbor at the polls. I want to see them voting early. I want to see democracy vibrant. I want to see it back to the people where we all care and look after one another, and individuality still has a place, but we all do better when we all do better.
Exactly. You're speaking of Jim Hightower, and he was here just a few weeks ago, and it was a good show. But some of his books, if somebody was interested, There's Nothing in the Middle of the Road but Yellow Stripes and Dead Armadillos, and the
If the gods had meant us to vote,
that he'd given us candidates.
Yeah.
And also, you know, Jim Hightower, he has a lot of good stuff to say. He appears weekly in the Independent, has a little column in there, and I don't know. I know he used to be on the radio. I'm not sure if he's still on the radio around town or not.
Well, the radio's the media is pretty much owned by corporations, and they kind of like the right wing talking heads, and I'm afraid there's precious few progressive communicators out there who get a chance at the corporate airwaves. So, you know, they have the tokenism on McNeil Lair and Face the Nation and so forth, but as far as real voices, they're not there. Because infotainment is where it's at now. You've got to be very careful about where you get your news and dig a little harder. But he's out there. Michael Moore's out there. Molly Ivins is out there. But you got to dig pretty hard for him. And the internet, although I don't have a computer. I still read. I'm one of those people that actually reads. But that's a good source. And who knows? Maybe this little cable station here will pick up the beat.
Real quick, we're running out of time. What are you doing to win?
I'm scrambling. I'm hustling, and I'm trying to be more creative than the other guy. We have big trailers, big trucks, big signs. Anybody that has a place where I could park my big trailer and my trucks and put our sign that's visible in El Paso County, please call me.
Okay.
I'm going everywhere I'm invited. I'm scratching and clawing, trying to get some name recognition, because ultimately, I'm afraid that's what it's about. And coming out of nowhere, you got to work pretty hard. And I take my good donkeys to parades and picnics. And Masai S. Democrat was in the convention center when I got the nomination up there, and I'll be walking neighborhoods with him. It's like anything else. You just work harder. But frankly, for me, with the uphill fight we've got, it's got to be a bold, imaginative stroke.
Okay. Curtis, thank you very much for being here with us tonight. If somebody wanted to work on your campaign, they could call you at 719-395-8065. I take it you can use volunteers.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Les.
Good night, and thank you for tuning in.
As 9/11 comes on, you want to ask the question, have we really changed since 9/11? Because there are things that still exist now that existed before, and that is corporate welfare, that is dismantling the infrastructure, that is Americans who are also complicit in terrorism. That nobody wants to ask that question. What is our role? What is our role? Why does the world seem to have it out for America? And do we have the humility to ask the question, what can we do to improve our diplomacy? What can we do to improve corporate behavior abroad? What can we do to curb multinational, institutionalized greed? Those are questions that we're asked here tonight. And the fact is there's some things that were happening on 9/10 that are still happening. And we'd like to address some of those things, and hopefully through debate with the sitting congressman, hopefully through debate coming up to the November elections, the things that haven't changed. America's changed somewhat since 9/11, but there's many things that still exist that we haven't addressed.